Welcome to Virteva's Let's Talk podcast for April 2026. We're back to continue our Adopting Copilot in 2026 series. And this month, Zach Brand joins the show to provide a business leader perspective on kind of the real cost of AI within your organization, measuring your return on investment, and our thoughts on the new Wave 3 Copilot features coming soon. Zach, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Scott. Good to be here.
So let's jump in kind of to our first topic here. And again, as in past shows, is I've got some window dressing up there for our YouTube watchers. So kind of the first thing that I wanted to talk about this month is, what's changed with Copilot. And I think before we even get into kind of the cost conversation on it, I think that it's important to kind of have a conversation about how the licensing strategy has shifted. So I've kind of broken this up into a few different talking points, but I think makes sense to just, talk about the elephant in the room, that there is a big licensing shift coming in May, which we were just made aware of recently. And that is the introduction of an E7 license and what that means for organizations. So the big kind of highlight here is that traditionally organizations would either have a business standard, a business premium license, an enterprise E3 and enterprise E5, which is for organizations that are larger than 300 employees. But what Microsoft has been doing, we've been talking about this internally, Zach, for a while now, is that we felt like this was going to come sooner than later, is a new license plan called the E7, which again, available May 1st. And what this does is it groups Microsoft 365 E5 and all the great E5 security and compliance features that come with that, plus a Copilot license. So you're talking right now about $57 per user per month. Again, those prices are going up as we get closer to July 1st. A Copilot license, which is $30 per user per month with an annual commit. And then this new piece called Agent 365 to kind of help you manage all the different agents that you have out there in your environment, whether you're building them yourself or whether you are purchasing, as Microsoft has kind of alluded to, an agent maybe that they or a third party has created, as it gives you a little bit more control over that. So, Zach, I guess kind of first question that I'll bounce off of you is this new E7 license is $99. So that's pretty expensive. If you do group everything together, I think that you're saving something like $19 per user per month. And with some of the shifts that are coming in July here, is with the changes in licensing and costs going up on that by about 5-10%, depending on your license type. Do you think that this is something worth kind of early adopting if you're a business customer in the enterprise space?
I think it's definitely worth exploring. Scott, we were chatting as we've been looking at AI features and functionality and value, and having that conversation, not just internally, but also with customers, is there's questions or concerns around controlling it, managing it, ensuring that data is not going where it shouldn't. I'm not going to say that, we haven't seen these features in the wild yet, but it's good that Microsoft's including some capability to better manage that risk. And I think it just depends on the organization. If they're more interested in AI or more risk averse when it comes to it, obviously they're not going to probably be listening to this podcast in the first place. But if they're really wanting to advance their AI capabilities, it's not just the features that are important. It's also the security and compliance side around it as well. So I think it's worth exploring it and having the conversation. I think each organization will make that decision for themselves, but I think having the conversation is the most important piece.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think that you could probably, especially if you're a customer with a business premium or an E3 right now, and you're adding on some of those security features, but maybe you don't need all of them from like the compliance side, is this license might feel fairly expensive to you. But I think as time goes on, and of course, Microsoft is going to say that we were asked for this. Well, we were probably asking for, a license that was a little less expensive than $99 per user per month. But if you're one of the bean counters, or you're in your finance department or your purchasing department, and you're looking at, well, we're adding on this P1 plan and this P2 plan, and we're uh, using pay as you go credits, is maybe it is starting to make more sense for some of those users that already have license A, B, and C, but they don't necessarily have D yet, which would be Agent 365. Is maybe it does make sense to add those on, especially if you can kind of lock in at that $99 per month for a 3-year term. I'm not saying that you'd probably want to license every user in your organization, but I think that there is a premium value add here for maybe your biggest power users. And a big piece of what we're going to talk about today is, how not only how the conversation is shifted, but also kind of that perceived value and return on investment, and how you can use the different monitoring tools out there available to you, whether it be Copilot dashboards or Microsoft 365 reports, to understand who's using Copilot across the board everywhere versus who's just kind of using the very basic solution. And I think that that's probably a good segue into our next topic, which is some of the changes that are being made to Copilot, started getting made last year in the fall, and are being made more and more as kind of time goes on here. Kind of our next talking point is the different tiers of Copilot, and this is just continued to shift, I feel like, over time. And Zach, I think that you'd probably agree that this is even extremely confusing within our own organization. We're a Microsoft partner, and we have been for probably close to 2 decades at this point, about 15 years, I want to say, that, it's confusing. So I guess, like, a question for you here is, we've got a basic plan that basically most business users are getting access to, where they can kind of ask Copilot questions but can't ground always in business data. And then you've got your premium plan, which is the prescribed license that we work with organizations on and do workshops on. And then you've got kind of that agentic approach. Is, Zach, from our organization standpoint, is basic enough, or is it more, we want to license more people with premium licenses, or even like kind of looking at that agentic piece of it where you use pay as you go? Like, what are your thoughts from kind of a service delivery perspective on what the right license type is here?
Yeah, great question, Scott. I think for this one, at least as we were running up to here's all the hype and promise on AI, and there are certainly examples where it knocks it out of the park, and there's certainly examples where it kind of fails to do some basic components. And I think that value proposition for AI was at times overly vague and generic and really hard for someone to grasp. It can do anything you want. It's like, all right, well, what can it do? It's like, well, anything that you want. And you need to get a little bit more specific there. But I think once you've started to use it, and once other people see the use cases of someone working, actually one of my managers who has a Copilot license was showing his team how he was using it, and now they're all requesting Copilot licenses, where before, you know, you could just request it, and we kind of did a round of Copilot acquisitions, and they didn't raise their hand. And then now a month later, after their manager has one, now they all want one. So I think once people see the actual use cases of how they actually use it in their own work, it becomes extremely valuable extremely quickly. And I can't necessarily imagine going back to basic, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, no, that's great to hear. And I mean, I've talked about it on the show before. I run those Copilot workshops internally, kind of our office hours, as they've kind of been branded, for folks to kind of learn and ask questions and see what's coming next. And then I know that I've got some plans for April, potentially May, to do some more agent-based training, because that's the buzzword that everybody wants to learn more and more about, but they don't always understand what actually comes with building and using agents. But it's always great to hear that people are getting interested in it. Usually my recommendation when I sit down and I talk to organizations about it is, well, what are you using today? Are you using OpenAI? Are you using Anthropic? Are you using Gemini? And I feel like the answer that I get more often than not is, "Oh, we're using everything." And my follow-up question is, "Do you have enterprise agreements with those companies?" And the answer is always, well, most of the time is no. In fact, it came up on one of our calls this morning, Zach, with Claude specifically, is there is importance in having those enterprise agreements because you're getting some of the legalese passed your way about, we're going to protect your data, we're not going to share it with external parties, et cetera. So I think that it's helpful to know that. That being said, kind of back in the Copilot context, is usually where I kind of point folks at is, if you don't have a premium license today and you don't want to pay the 360 a year for it, a great entry point is just that basic license. Now, Microsoft, and this is kind of leading into my second talking point, is actually making some changes with that this year, but it's at an organizational level. So if you're an organization of under 2,000 users, you've got Copilot Chat Basic already included. That gives you the ability to kind of go to the Copilot app or go to Microsoft Word or Excel and use those Copilot buttons directly in there to kind of work with what you have open or do kind of some of that retrieval augmented generation RAG as it is, and even kind of web-based agent use. Now, if you are an organization of over 2,000, this is kind of where that shift is coming from, is that, I think Microsoft kind of realized, we're giving a lot of stuff away for free here, and they want to kind of get more folks onto that premium license. So that basic functionality that exists today within kind of Word, Excel, PowerPoint is kind of shifting to the Copilot app instead of being directly available within the individual apps. And if you want to use that and you're an organization larger than 2,000 employees, that's where you're going to have to actually start buying that premium license. So not all this stuff has taken effect, and this was kind of dropped on us a couple of weeks ago. It was a bit of a surprise because, we saw Microsoft adding more and more capabilities. And I think that the question we had internally, Zach, was, well, isn't this kind of, degrading their the value of that license? Like, why would you buy that license if you were getting the features baked in? And I think that this is Microsoft, I think, has kind of seen that light as well, and they need to be able to prove that they're getting the return on investment off of it. So they're making some of those changes. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think that this is bad, or do you think this is kind of Microsoft just the writing on the wall? They've got to sell the product that they're putting out there in order to maintain it?
Yeah, and you had alluded to license confusion earlier, Scott. This is pretty confusing. To tier it out by organization size, even though organization A has the same license as organization B, to have different features is pretty confusing. So I'm honestly not a huge fan of it. I guess I can see the why behind it, as you already alluded to.
Yeah.
But certainly not my favorite change of the stack. So we'll see how that plays out over time. I would venture to guess that they make adjustments to that sooner rather than later.
Yeah, and I'm kind of zipping back down to the E7 conversation here too for our YouTube watchers, just to kind of help you understand what you're actually getting across those different platforms. But yeah, the Copilot chat piece, and we're doing internal workshops for a financial organization right now, Holly and and I can't tell you how many times I've been asked in those workshops, how can you make it easier to understand what the basic version versus what the premium version is? And Microsoft hasn't really been super forward.
It's confusing by design.
Yeah, they haven't been super forward facing about actually producing those documents. So, we work with folks in the MVP community and we follow that and we try to create our own charts, but Copilot licensing and features and new additions and capabilities, I feel like it changes every 10 to 14 days. Like, I am constantly going back and updating our workshops. I'll say something in an office hour in February, and then in March, it'll be invalidated because they changed it or retired a feature that was in there.
Yeah.
Kind of goes back to the conversation with scheduled prompts is something that they introduced in July. But before that, it was called Copilot Actions, as it was announced at Ignite a couple of years ago. And then Copilot Actions is now a different product entirely compared to what they ended up ultimately rolling out with scheduled prompts. So just interesting how quickly all of this is evolving. One of the first big workshop customers that we worked with, a customer out of the Northeast, 40,000 person healthcare company. Someone on their team actually put it really well as I was kind of going through and giving the presentation, because people were a little frustrated because it was hard to understand, where do I use it? Why do I use it? What's the value add to it? And you kind of have to treat it almost like 15 years ago with the advent or the introduction of cloud-based software and SaaS solutions. Is we're still like in the first 2 to 3 years of Copilot, and in software years and lifecycle management, like Copilot is still kind of in the infancy to toddler phase right now. It's not really, I don't want to call it not mature, though I think that based on some conversations we've had on our Monday or Thursday calls, you probably agree is that there is more need for maturity in it, because it does very much feel like they're running as fast as possible, breaking things, and then fixing them as they go to try and stay ahead of all the other competitors in the space.
Yeah. Scott, maybe something that you mentioned earlier that spurred my mind, if you actually just want to go back real quick to the license chart, is you had mentioned business premium or business basic organizations. We were talking about E7, and obviously there's options to supplement that without having to obviously jump from business basic and business premium all the way up to E7 is a significant jump in cost for Microsoft licensing. But obviously you can license users with Copilot and eventually Agent 365 separately, and be just very targeted and specific about who's maybe getting some of those licenses.
Mm-hmm.
So just to maybe just dial back for some of those organizations that may not have E3 or E5, that there's certainly some alternatives on piecemealing some of that together. But yeah, Scott, you're right, is if you start piecemealing together too many of the licenses, you end up basically paying about the same as just buying the bundled one. So something to watch out for.
Yeah, I mean, paying as much as, or sometimes even we've seen more, like even with customers that have E5 licenses today, or E3 licenses. And once you add on a few plan 2s, a few plan 1s, you're adding on extra SharePoint space, you're adding Copilot licenses, is
RBI.
that license that was $57 per user per month is now closer to $100 per user per month. So that I think is where the E7 is going to make a lot of sense. But I think that a lot of organizations today too, when they have E5s, is they're giving them to their IT teams, to their security teams, or they're giving them to the most vulnerable users in the environment. Maybe somebody that works in finance, HR, maybe an executive's getting it just for some of those extra like identity protection components. So I think that especially with, EAs kind of going away for a lot of organizations this year, and the opportunity to kind of lock in your early licensing before the July 1st license cost changes, this is a good opportunity to kind of identify the power users in your company, sit down with your finance or your purchasing teams, understand how much are we actually paying per month for these users, and then bake in some of those additional components. And this isn't even really talking about some of the additional features that are coming as well, the like E5, where some of the Intune Suite licensing that was previously locked and gated behind its own license SKU is being added into those E5s, and even some of that functionality is coming to E3 as well. So being aware of that, following our newsletter, just the Microsoft blogs will help you keep up on that stuff. But yeah, we're in an interesting shift right now for sure in terms of value add versus licensing cost. So last kind of thing that I really wanted to talk about in this area is, we've got our different license plans here. And as you're adopting and as you're understanding that, and again, I want to highlight, because I didn't spend a lot of time talking about the pay-as-you-go functionality that comes with the Copilot agents, is Basic is a great spot to start for most organizations that just want to introduce AI, but they don't really have a lot of kind of planned workflows baked out and how they actually want to be using it. And then when you kind of step up to that premium experience, this is where you're grounding data, you're creating agents internally, whether it's an agent that's a personal agent or it's a Copilot Studio agent. This is kind of that next logical step. That said, though, you can also start with basic, and then create a couple of Copilot agents specifically to your own organizational use cases that have workflows built into them, or they're using custom knowledge. And then you can allow the basic license holders to use those through pay-as-you-go and consumption-based licensing. So there's a few different ways that you can kind of slice it up. And certainly not trying to scare people away from the premium license, but I know a lot of the questions that we get when working on workshops, or that I hear just from people that I talk out in the field, is like, what is the actual value? Because if you go behind the scenes and you start looking at some of that report data, and that's really going to kind of lead us into our next segment here, is kind of understanding that overall return on investment, is how do you defend those line items? How do you defend $360 per user on those licenses? And that's where you really need to start kind of taking that phased model approach, is starting everyone with basic and having it act as your on-ramp, and then starting to move users into those premium type pilots to allow costs to kind of ramp up over time. As you're kind of baking in and starting to roll with those premium pilots, is understanding, well, we're not just going to let like all these different people in from different parts of the organization. Like, let's find the best use cases for it by creating personas within the organization, and then saying, you know what, who's really going to benefit from this the most upfront, the quickest? And let's say it's project managers, for example, who have M365 E5s right now, plus a P3 or a P5 project license. Well, having those components also gives them access to things like Power BI, gives them access to Microsoft Planner and Project, and then taking advantage of something like the project agent that exists out there to kind of help speed along and build out new projects, make them reproducible, have it create executive summaries. If you build these things out into a Teams channel, you can put an agent directly within the channel now to automatically provide status updates internally and then build your external status reports. So a lot of value there. And then kind of understanding, so as you're ramping and building and adding new people in this phased approach, is, are you actually looking at your Copilot dashboards? Are you looking at the Power BI reports that are available out there? And are you using your M365 reporting? It's important to kind of note too, on that last note with reporting data, is this can be painful depending on how many Copilot licenses you actually have. So if you have under 50 licenses, it becomes a very manual approach of having someone kind of sit down and understand that they have to go in and they have to pull all the data manually and massage it and make it look good for your executives. As you kind of ramp up and you've got more than 50 users in there, that's where Microsoft makes it a little bit easier for you to kind of understand that. But Zach, I guess I'll kind of point it back to you, as we've gone through and kind of talked through all the talking points here already. You're on the delivery side of the business. You're interacting with our general managers or sales teams or CEO. Like, how do you talk internally within the company about how Copilot's being used today, where we can get value adds from it? And maybe even there's some precarious situations with it. Like, for example, like, we're a managed service company. We work with 50 plus different customers on a monthly basis. Is what happens when you've got a couple of those folks that are saying, we don't want you to use AI with anything? Like, how do we approach that? I guess that's kind of my pushback question to you.
Yeah, carefully is the answer. Yeah, no, you're correct. We do have a couple customers that we cannot use their data in AI models when we've done some proof of concept innovations within either M365 or ServiceNow, or kind of our two primary technology solutions that we leverage. we've had to think about that and kind of design security from the beginning, so to speak. So that's had to be our approach. Others might uncover other challenges, but yeah, we've had to do that. In terms of utilization and leveraging it, we've done another wave of releasing additional Copilot licenses, and the folks that have used it, I mean, they do really use it, and they'll say, "Hey, look, I made this," and they'll kind of say, "AI helped me." So they're very forthcoming with what they've been able to do, and I think for at least a worst case scenario, it helps them get probably 60, 70, 80% of the way through if they need to respond to an email, or they want to build a report, or they want to show a summary of status updates, etc. That AI can help them do the work faster. So even some that have maybe been a little bit maybe more shy about the technology for various reasons, once they've used it and see how it can help, you know, is it perfect? Is it going to craft everything with 100% accuracy? No. Obviously, you want to review it. At least my advice is to make it sound you. You have your own. We all have our own individual communication styles, but we can leverage AI to at least help us get started, and maybe that gets us 80% down the path, and then we tweak and modify as needed. But at the end of the day, we saved time by not having to do kind of the grunt work, and that initial design, wireframe, etc. is there for us to just put the finishing touches on.
Yeah, well, that's a great answer. And it's a good segue kind of into our next topic here. But I did want to ask you one more question specifically on ROI. And I know that the slide I've got up there right now is the 4 measurement tools that you can use, which I kind of talked about, is Copilot Dashboard, your App In Center, Viva Insights, and kind of customizing that stuff. But I think that the 4th measuring stick is it's really you, and it's you within the organization, not you per se, but just the individual that's kind of helping lead those efforts. Is you are going to know more about your organization than Copilot ever will, because you've worked in it for as long as you have. You're going to have a good idea of how different work streams run, how different departments interact with data. And I think that you need to, especially if from an agentic standpoint, is if you really want to get good return on investment back on these features that you're using, is how are you designing agents or updating your workflows or baking Copilot into your day-to-day to make you more efficient? And that's one of the things that I really kind of try to focus in on with organizations during our workshops is, hey, this is a great tool, and you're paying a decent amount of money for it, but how are you actually using it? And how are you enforcing behavioral change? Because that's the big thing with Copilot and just generative AI tools in general is if you don't actually understand how to talk to them, if you don't understand how to use them or how to get value out of them, it's just an expensive license, right? And Zach, I don't know if from a return on investment standpoint, could you put it into words? And that's okay if you can't either. Like how have we benefited the most, and how have you seen that kind of payback back in dividends for us?
Yeah, it's a good question. How do you measure an instance where someone would have typically taken 30 minutes to type up maybe a summary email or something that's maybe going to go to customers that needs to be well thought of or well thought through and articulated very carefully, when let's just say, if back to my statement earlier on, if AI can get you 80% of the way, and then you can tweak and review before sending. Obviously, if there's context based on other data, hence our kind of our premium licensing, AI can probably do a pretty good job of that. And you quantify that and how many times? It is tough, but also depending on the role, to get $30 return on investment every month, that's not too hard to grasp, in my opinion. If you're saving time on multiple emails or multiple reports or multiple spreadsheets, etc. I don't know that the ROI is that difficult to get to. But yeah, I mean, it depends on the organization. If you're in healthcare and you're saving a doctor's time, $30 of savings can occur pretty quick. So
And
yeah, just depends. Yeah.
the healthcare example is a really good one too. And this was one of the ones that kind of came up in our early participation workshops with different customers is if you are a doctor, like let's say you're in a clinical setting and you're seeing, let's say 5 to 6 patients a day. You're sitting with them for 30 minutes. And then after you're done kind of meeting and consulting with them, you're taking some real quick notes when they're with you. And then when they're leaving, you have to type up a full report. But if you're using transcription features like Dragon Copilot or Copilot for Healthcare or whatever you're using specifically, just from a generative AI perspective, is think about it just typing up the notes for you. Think about the facilitator agent in Microsoft Teams. Great example is as you are having your conversation and you've got transcription on or you're recording that meeting, is the facilitator is trying to help you ask the right questions that you need to while you're in that meeting. And then it's also providing you a list of what you talked about so far to kind of help you stay on track. And then it's taking maybe the 30 minutes that would take the doctor to finish typing up their notes. Maybe it's only taking them 5 minutes now. So you're getting 25 minutes back. And then what does that do for the rest of the day is typically you're only seeing 5, 6 customers a day at the clinic a day. And now maybe you can do 8 or 9, or maybe you can do 10. And ultimately what that does for the business is, the more people you can get in the door and see, the more you can charge, the more money you can make. So while yes, you're spending that $30 per user per month on that license, that probably is paying for itself in the first couple of days of the month, right? And then at that point, you're really just kind of adding on that return on investment as you kind of go, because you're seeing it kind of pay those dividends and kind of help make the company more money. And not only that, but also make your healthcare professionals a little bit more efficient, I guess is the word to say, right? All right. So we're about at our 30-minute mark right now. So there is a couple of last things I wanted to cover, and that's some of the big Wave 3 announcements. We are going to spend a lot more time in our May podcast talking specifically about agents, when to build what agent versus, so you've got your agent builder, you've got your Copilot Studio, you've got your Microsoft Foundry agents that you can build. We're going to talk through all of that stuff. But as I kind of knocked on agents at the beginning of the podcast, is I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about specifically kind of less of Copilot as a rollout and more as kind of that graduation process from just using the chat bot to kind of moving into more of a true agentic experience. So you've got your basic chat experience today. That's the Microsoft 365 Copilot app, where you're basically going in and you're saying, hey, I've got a question. Can you answer it for me? And then the Copilot answers your question for you. Maybe you're building agents that have a specific workflow today, but it's kind of very rigid. The term agentic, as I think that it was originally intended to be and has it starting to morph more into, is more about Copilot doing things for you rather than just answering questions like a chatbot today. So one of the biggest stories in tech right now outside of Microsoft is Claude Cowork, Claude Code. These are new capabilities. We're seeing the kind of the same thing come with Gemini and ChatGPT as well, but I don't think anyone is doing it as well as Anthropic is today. And this new kind of co-work opportunity that they're introducing is taking generative AI to the next step from an agent perspective. Is it's instead of going in there and asking a question, is you're just telling it to do something. And a perfect example of that, and I've talked about this over the past couple of months as we've had frontier access to some of the Claude models under the scenes, is this deck that you're seeing on the screen for our YouTube watchers is 12 pages long. And I didn't make it. I went to the frontier agent for PowerPoint And I basically kind of gave it my high level script and said, these are the things that we're talking about. These are the talking points. This is how I'm breaking this podcast up into 3 different sections. And I chose a style. I gave it some direction and I let it cook for about 15 minutes and it baked me out all these slides. Did I have to go back and edit them? Absolutely. They weren't perfect. Font sizes, location of things on pages needed to be changed, but that's kind of the new experience that's coming in. Claude does this in PowerPoint for Frontier users, and it's really rolling out at this point for general availability. But there is another piece of the Anthropic model, which is you install Claude as a program on your computer, and then it has the ability to interact with your file system. It has the ability to create documents and do things on your behalf. This is kind of where Microsoft is starting to move as kind of the big Wave 3 announcement, is Copilot becoming more agentic than just the chatbot that you're used to today. So originally when this was introduced, is my understanding on it was this is going to be very similar to Claude. And then I kind of circled back and discovered that, well, it sounds like this is actually going to run primarily in the cloud rather than on the local device, which is probably, allow some of our security team members, both internally and across all the different orgs out there, to breathe a little bit of a sigh of relief, because giving a AI agent control of your entire computer sounds like it could be pretty scary. Same thing probably goes for giving it access to your tenant data. I think that the benefit there is that Copilot only has access to what you have access to, but that kind of drills all the way back into the conversation Taylor and I had last month about if you're not following best practice zero trust principles, is generative AI will kind of slap you in the face real quick and wake you up that you need to get your permissions right. So, Zach, how, I guess, kind of to lean over to you, and I know that I sent you a couple of these articles ahead of time to kind of get familiar with, is where do you kind of see us internally using some of these co-work opportunities with Copilot as it kind of upgrades itself here over the next couple of months?
Where do I see ourselves using it? See, that's a great question that I don't know the answer to, Scott.
And that's perfectly okay. And that's, I think that a lot of organizations kind of have it the same way. Like I know one of the areas that I have thought about using it is, I have 10 different managed customers that I work with. And then I also work as an advisory AI consultant on our professional services team. And then I sit on a couple of our different leadership boards for AI. You know, it's hard to get all that work done, but if I can create the right prompt and I can say, and I'm going to actually pull up the video that I have linked here just for a little bit of additional eye candy here. So kind of what I'm showing off here on the screen, and you could hear a little bit of it behind the scenes, is when Cowork kind of tackles these problems is you go to the Microsoft 365 Copilot app, and you kind of drill into what you want to share with it, different document types. And then you just say, I need to prepare for a meeting, but I need to put a deck together and I don't have the 30 minutes to put this deck together. So here's what we've talked about in the last couple of emails that I've had with the customer. Here's the last couple meeting notes that I've transcribed and dropped into my OneNote file or a Loop file. Here's a couple of Excel sheets, a couple of Word documents. Maybe I'm putting together a proposal for a customer and I need to morph it into a deck. And you just kind of tell Copilot, here's everything that I have. Here's the expected outcome that I have. Here's how I'd like you to format it. Can you do all this work for me? And then can you, on top of that, also schedule a meeting with these people involved? I need you to look at their calendars and make sure that everyone's available. And instead of you having to kind of go out there and do all those individual tasks on your own, that some of them might take 10 minutes a piece, some of them might take 45 minutes to kind of put that stuff together, is you can kind of prompt Copilot to just go out there using this new Frontier agent to just do all of that for you. And again, the way that this works is very similar to kind of like Claude Code and Cowork. But the difference is going to be that this is in the cloud. So, Zach, I don't know if kind of showing you this and kind of talking through that a little bit more kind of opens up your mind on like areas that we could use it.
Absolutely, yeah. Our team serves multiple different customers where they're pulling reports, gathering data, articulating that back to our customer. And I think that's where this can be very valuable is it can take that data and make it visual, summarize it, allow us to do that at scale much better, and at least allow us to kind of look at maybe the more granular details or maybe the more strategic steps that should be taken rather than spending time, updating spreadsheets or charts or PowerPoint slides. At least as one example, if we're also trying to you either build a scope of work or update project plans, if we can spend less time doing those types of things, which, I think customers do value that stuff. But I guess if we can make our pricing more competitive or if we can provide a better experience for our customers, that's ultimately what I think they're probably more interested in at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you kind of brought up those use case examples too, because this kind of gets back to the early agent conversations that we've talked about on the podcast before, and the same ones that I have internally is you have to develop your use cases. You kind of have to understand how you can use it, and kind of getting back to some of the conversations that you and I have had about like building out like a scoping agent or building out an RFP response agent is
Right.
these tools, these generative AI tools will try to use best practice guidance available within the LLM. But if you have your own specific way of doing it, or like, let's say you have a portfolio of services available to you that you want it to references, making sure that you're sanitizing and building out the data in an easily readable format for Copilot is going to be helpful. So while this stuff isn't available yet, there are ways that you can actually already prepare for it by just kind of taking some of those early first steps. Just showing off a couple of different things here on the screen for the YouTube watchers about, kind of building meeting packets and kind of scheduling out different meeting calendar invites and stuff like that, and the ability to pull from sources and compile and analyzing that data. I know, Zach, you and I were talking about like the benefit that Copilot could have in kind of helping out with ticket reviews. Well, a good use case for this, and don't quote me on this because again, since this runs in the cloud, it might be a little bit different, but having the ability to allow Copilot to kind of like navigate a web page on your behalf could be a huge benefit. Let's say that you have a bunch of tickets in ServiceNow and you wanted to kind of do a ticket review on that. Well, if Copilot can look at the ticket in ServiceNow and then go out and you train it on how to reference your knowledge base, for example, is it could look at the ticket, see how it was handled, maybe even listen in on a phone call if it had access to that as well, and then look at your best practice knowledge document on how things should be done or how they should be handled. This is kind of like if you have a quality management team, let's say of 5 people that are doing this today, and you could build out an agent to do this, or you could train your agents that are doing that quality management approach today, is this just frees them up to do more tasks on a monthly basis. So if you're doing 200 a month today, maybe this enables you to do 250 or 300 a month as you start to get used to using these different tools out there. Zach, anything else that you have from a use case perspective, or anything else that you think that would be valuable for our customers to kind of better understand or better know how they can kind of take advantage of these tools as they start rolling out?
Yeah. I mean, well, for use cases are kind of tough because not every organization is the same. Organizations have different tool sets, different maybe set of constraints, whether they be regulatory or customer driven. So use cases are tough. I think, Scott, you had put up, I think, a really good framework for rolling it out. And I think that's just trying those small pilots and just do some gradual iterations, many examples, teaching your users how to leverage the technology is really key because they will discover their own use cases and they will be creative in their own right rather than trying to think and kind of force this more top-down innovation approach, leveraging more of a grassroots innovation approach by teaching the user base how this technology works, best practices, things not to do. Uh, and I think they will discover their own efficiencies and their own innovations that they can bubble up. And maybe that does become the gold standard for that department or that division or that role. And I think that's just kind of the way to do that. If you can do a lot of cycles around that, you should have a lot of winners that you can then leverage and bring up to, best practice and SOP for, for that role, et cetera, going forward. So in my opinion, that's a great formula. That's low risk and I think has a lot of upside.
Yeah. No, that's very well said. And this goes back to kind of the conversations that Holly and I have about training and enablement and adoption is, it's kind of the KISS method is keep it simple, smarty. And I know that we rolled out a lot of Copilot licenses at the beginning of the year, and I did two different training segments on, I think like both 60 minutes a piece or something like that. And one of the feedback items I got was, oh, you spent too much time on the Copilot app. And I heard this from one of our account managers, and I was like, well, the reason why I spent as much time on the Copilot app is because this is really like your starting point. Like, if you don't understand how to prompt and how to have conversations with the chatbot, is you're skipping the necessary steps before you start to move to agents. And I think that because
Right.
agent and agentic is the buzzword, is everybody just wants to go straight to agent, but not fully understand the technology and how to actually use it. So I think that why I call that phase one plan basic and just kind of using the basic functionality is, just get accustomed to it. Like start playing around with it, seeing where it's going to be useful. And then when you feel like you're ready to take the next step and ground in business data is, start approaching like, hey, I'd like to get a license. Like, can I request one within the organization and then build from there? Because it is a big step from just understanding how to effectively prompt to how to effectively prompt and ground in your data and create documents in Word, Excel, PowerPoint, etc. I mean, these new agent modes that are out there that, again, are more truly agentic than what they've been called for the past year or so is, they take a big leap, but you also have to kind of be able to back yourself up a little bit and understand that was everything that it actually outputted correct. So you can't just ask it to do something and just rely on it being correct. If Microsoft was doing that, they'd probably be rolling out less broken Windows updates right now, right?
Real.
So just closing thoughts from my side. And this kind of leans into what I was just talking about. But if you can't explain who Copilot is for within your organization, you won't really be able to explain why you're paying for it. So we discuss a lot today, new features, agentic use cases, some of the new stuff that's coming down the road, as well as licensing changes and how to track your return on investment. So I'm hoping that this was informative for those of you that stayed tuned all the way to the end. Next time, we're going to be talking a little bit more about the difference again between chatbots, Copilot Studio agents, web-grounded agents, kind of those Microsoft 365 premium agents that ground in your own business data, how to set them up, how to support them, the headaches that come with that. As we were talking earlier this morning, Zach, as one of my agents couldn't figure out what the next payroll period was for some reason last Friday. And then when I asked the following day, it had no problem understanding it and I hadn't made any changes to it. So there is just the generative AI journey can be a little bit of headache and a little bit of a puzzle in and of itself some days. But I think that, again, what we're trying to kind of get across in the first half of the year with these kind of advisory podcasts, specifically around Copilot, is just how you can kind of get your own organization moving forward and understanding where to take advantage of the capabilities and when to take advantage of the capabilities. So, Zach, thanks again for stopping by today. If your organization is interested in Microsoft 365 or you're already using it today and you need help with implementing or managing those services, you can contact Virteva by emailing us at letstalk@virteva.com or by visiting our website at www.virteva.com. Thanks again for tuning in. And if you made it this far, as always, please feel free to hit those like and subscribe buttons. Really helps us kind of grow the channel and get this message out to more people. Thanks again. Take it easy until next time.